Okay, I think we have a quorum now. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm just confirming the other presenters, George and Laura, are online as well.
We're all set, Simon. Thanks to everybody for joining.
Great. Well, let me do some brief introductions. And first of all, thank you very much for everybody taking the time to join this webinar today. This is a webinar with two companies, Lucidworks and Sohosquared. Lucidworks, for those joining must remember that we're one of the leading insight engine technologies for search and a variety of data discovery subjects globally. And then Sohosquared, a fairly new company, but also one very specifically aligned to solving problems in the call center through intelligent approaches to speech and the translation of speech into text. And George and Lauren from Sohosquared will be going a lot more into this as we go through the presentation today. So with that, let me move quickly to get into some of the content here. So my name's Simon Taylor. I run all of our partner alliances at Lucidworks, and obviously Sohosquared is one of my partners. And joining me is Lauren, who's the CTO of Sohosquared, and then George, who's the CEO managing partner of Sohosquared. So we've got a good selection of people on the call today. Now, that's the good news. The even better news is in this space that we're in around search, compliance, speech, things to do with analytics, we've all probably got combined experience of probably nearly over 40 years. So there's a lot of good knowledge here, and as we go through this today, certainly at the end there's going to be opportunity for questions. But if you have any questions that are burning all the way through this, please feel free to put them into the chat. We've got people looking at the chat, and then they can also tell us what those questions are, and we can answer them as we go along today. So with that, let me just move on a little bit to give you a bit of framework here, so what we're going to be talking about. So the reason why we entitled this presentation Intelligence for the Call Center is because off the back of COVID-19, there's a lot of very good research that's come out just recently. It's really defining what the huge impact has been of people working from home, of people doing things more virtually. And a good example was Gartner in the back of June, a couple of months ago. They did some good research, and they sort of highlighted that there was between 4,000 and 1,000% increase in traffic into support centers and support functions in just the last few months, which is phenomenal. And this is really driven by people, not wanting to stay on the line for 45 minutes or having some frustration about not being able to go physically into a bank, for example. And as a result of that, obviously, this has created a lot of stress on call centers, how people are disseminating information to their customers, how they're enabling their own staff in a call center, the agents, to become more efficient because they're now working from home, they're not in a single place. And it's become a very exasperating issue right now. If we dive into this a little bit more, though, when we think about how people respond to this, there's really three things that have been top of mind for people at the moment. The first is customer demand. Because the need for information has skyrocketed, people wanting to know, how they go about getting a test from a healthcare company, or how they go about getting access to funds in their financial accounts because they no longer have their job or they've been furloughed, for example. Things have changed a lot. So that knowledge dispersion, that knowledge seeking type of thought process has changed dramatically. So we need to support customers differently. The second big area is employees working from home. They've shifted to non-physical environments, and therefore the social networks, i.e. not being able to lean over your shoulder and just tap someone and say, what's the answer to this question? I've got this person on the line, versus being able to use collaborative technologies or even get access to systems much more efficiently to be able to get the resolutions to those calls has become extremely challenging as well. And then the third area is time. What's been very interesting about certainly the hurdles that we've been through with COVID-19 is that the initial reaction when everybody started working from home was to open up the kimono, give people access to all sorts of corporate systems, and try and hope it would work. Well, that actually created a decrease in productivity, certainly for employees, because they were deluged with a whole bunch of solutions and information that they just couldn't get their mind around fast enough. So organizations right now have a very limited runway to digitally transform the way that they operate a lot of their call center and customer service environments to go and respond to this. So that said, these three things, other things to be aware of. And specifically, there's two real metrics that are really important right now. So if we look since February, we've seen overall globally an increase in 11% ticket volume. That means there's a significant increase in the amount of people just going to resources to ask questions. And some of those questions could be fairly simple and straightforward. Others might be more complicated, particularly when it comes to people maybe not having their job and they're looking to maybe defer their mortgage payments, things like that, and they're looking to talk to banks. But they don't want to wait online for an hour, right? It's immediate. People want to know how to go and get the right information. So that's number one. The second also big stat around this is using electronic mechanisms. So we've seen over a 10 times increase in the amount of chat online sessions. Now, for those that are familiar with chatbots, the majority of chatbots that are used globally are fairly dumb, in the sense that, you know, if you don't ask the question in the right way, you don't get the right response, or you get a response that's not necessarily aligned to the question at all that you're trying to ask, because they're pre-programmed, there's predefined rules around those question answering pairs. What's needed though is something a bit more intelligent around that. And conversely, in the agent area, what we were talking about in the explosive call center space, we very much need to provide intelligence, the right type of tool sets to the agents to make them more efficient as well. So that being the scene here, what we're going to talk about for the rest of this session today is really what it means to connect both customers coming into an organization prior to the call center and the call center staff and agents themselves to much better insight. Now, the best way of comparing and contrasting where we are and how we approach this today is basically to think about what life was like a few years ago, when we had very routine, predictable, very defined systems for incident support, and very centralized knowledge management, and the data was being held centrally, and there wasn't really this idea of a dispersed or social environment. So that was very predictable, a uni-channel, if you like. And then today we have a very connected world. I mean, a good example would be your answer to a question that you have for a particular issue might not necessarily be resolved by the person you're talking to, may need a subject matter expert, may need external sources of information to go and help resolve that as well, particularly if it's a call center in some public health or government function, where you're trying to look at the social demographics of where you are and maybe how COVID's impacting you. That's not necessarily something that somebody would have in their core knowledge systems, but by triaging external sources and understanding how that relates to their data set, and bringing that into a better, if you like, insightful approach, and through a distributed knowledge management approach, then we're really addressing this omni-channel experience for the individual, this full 360 perspective. So that's what it means today. And of course, it's very hard to digitally transform to get to that point, particularly rapidly, if you're not using the right technology. So let's just talk about what that means from a technology point of view. So today, the way that we sort of think about it is there's probably 6 sort of things that are needed in the role of the support center. Everything from better customer-facing knowledge disbursement or knowledge dissemination through web content, Q&A forums, or knowledge bases. And then there's really what happens inside the call center through customer relationship management and incident support, the guidance we're giving agents as they're in calls, and ideally actively, not passively, i.e. when they finished. And then also the analytics and compliance that help us tune the way that call center is going to run. And then technology-wise, the way we tend to think about it is better search and browse. I mean, the bolstering that needs to happen right now, both externally and internally around the workplace search tools for knowledge is considerable. You know, how many people today really truly have a solution where they can know their customer better, they can ask questions, they can find information very quickly. And of course, that then feeds into a virtual chatbot. If you have something that's intelligent that you can curate content to, and maybe it's something that you've already thought about, so there's already a question that exists, or maybe it's something that you haven't thought about that you need to sort of associate with the type of sentiment and questioning that's going along, or the keywords or structure of the natural language, so you can give someone an answer to something that may be very close to what they're looking for, but it's not necessarily something you've predefined in an FAQ, for example. That's what intelligent chatbots are about. And we talk about knowledge mining assets, customer-facing content. Why can't people have access to that? It will reduce your call volume. Looking at past incident tickets to help resolve, we'll talk about that. And then we move directly into the voice call itself, which is how do we provide real-time assistance and giving agents the directives to say, rather than having to come offline or keep somebody waiting for 20 minutes, is there a resource or tool set that people can gain access to ultimately improve that experience? And that includes sentiment, the way people feel, the way the call is going. Are people frustrated or not able to necessarily create or get the right level of empathy with the agent because there's something blocking that we can identify and go and address, and that then improves interaction analytics. So this is the sort of wheelhouse that we think about from a support point of view. Now, what that means, though, if we start to focus in on areas where we can get to sort of efficient conversation, there's really two big areas we can sort of think about, which is how do we use technology coming in to the call center to try and deflect things, and then how do we improve the experience for people in the call center to improve their handling. So if we think about this, first of all, just to think about what we've experienced just recently. We've got a rapid increase in call volume, and we've got then intelligent ways to maybe deflect that. So if we had ways to intelligently provide question answering, not just statically what sits in FAQ, the net effect for that would be probably a significant reduction in call volume and in deflection as a result of that through the intelligence. And that's really what the first part of this sort of sine wave set curves means. But then what generally happens is, if you don't have something that's adaptive from a chatbot perspective, or even something that an agent can use to improve that conversation, you rapidly get into the converse of that, where the next question somebody asks is a lot more complicated because it's become more specific. And unless you have ways of really trying to understand the personalization that's associated with that individual, their own data, and what it means to resolve that, it becomes extremely challenging to move them through a rapid resolution process. So the first stage of that is what we call passive recommendation. How do we improve the experience we give customers on the way into the call center, or immediately, to try and reduce the impact of the volume of data or the volume of call that we're getting? The second part of this is really the agent assist part of this, which is a combination of the two to provide what we call active recommendation. And really, this is about understanding the individual. You only bring these deflections and intelligence-based curves back into normality when you understand the individual. That's what we call personalization, so that we can provide real-time guidance specific to that request or that individual, and understand the sentiment of that individual and their circumstances, so that we can direct the agent to the right outcome. That technology is very limited today, and what you're going to see here today is some groundbreaking stuff that allows us to go and really truly address that in this space. So today, if we can get more to the right, but obviously have deflection technology on the left of this sort of chart, we're going to really create this true 360, a modern approach to getting to this sort of omni-channel experience. So picking up on the two themes then, what does it mean by passive self-service? And I'll sort of build this out a little bit just to give you a perspective. It means extending the use of knowledge management to self-service. It means exposing knowledge, but in a way that's secure and also personalized, so that the individual understands that content. It means using chatbots to triage. Chatbots already triage, but not necessarily intelligently, so people get frustrated, so making them more specific. We need to drive insight. We need to know what the next best thing is that someone's asking, through insight to the way that they're looking for information. We often call that signals, or a form of machine learning, to try and drive a learning model to really truly understand how people are navigating through information, so that we can offer up the right piece of information. Being more proactive, anticipating what people need based on what they've been looking for previously or how they're browsing, that's really important as well. One of the key aspects, though, is to bolster internal and external search, which is to provide the right level of technology. And let's just face it, keyword and phrase searching doesn't cut it in this type of environment. We need to do things that are based on natural language. In other words, the language of the individual in multi-language, asking questions in their own voice, maybe through Google Assistant, maybe through Siri or Alexa, and translating that to text so we can interpret that. And then adapting that to intelligent Q&A, so we can dynamically build the type of Q&A pairing that people truly do need to be more effective. Just because historically you might have had a single document, when one of our competitors does that, where you just might have a question on one end and answer on the other, doesn't mean they're always going to be like that. You might have a knowledge base of content that's related semantically to the same question, but because you haven't linked them and you've got no machine learning to truly drive that, the two things stay separate, and therefore your customer's going to be frustrated, your internal agent's going to be frustrated, you're not going to get to the answer you need. So that's what passive self-service means. A good way of really illustrating how we solve this with technology is to think about really some of the solutions in this space. And one of the ones I'm going to talk about is what we have at Lucidworks here, which is to drive a real true connection between information and really deliver that to the next generation search. What that means, though, first of all, is that we have to connect information to the digital workplace. That doesn't happen by magic. Harry Potter's not involved with this and wave a magic wand and here we go. But it does mean that the technology is able to ingest that data more effectively and do it quickly, turn it into an insight engine, something that we can gain insight around, understand intent prediction, things that are relevant to individuals, personalization, and then model that in a way into tool sets that customers can easily access inside a web browser, inside a knowledge search, but also inside core applications for incident response as well. And we have this technology today. It's called Lucidworks Fusion, and we dynamically build solutions in this area very, very quickly. And what it means to do that is we start off with the core information systems. We understand how we connect some of those components together in a Fusion platform. And then we plug in some of this intelligence that we're talking about with natural language or signals, which is machine learning to go understand personalization, or entity extraction to map to different languages, or really dynamic rule creation because we were trying to anticipate what people are going to search for from a query perspective. And then from that, build particular or have particular solutions in place to go and deflect call volume. And really, we have two things today that we really do extremely well coming into a call center environment, which is intelligent virtual assistants. That's the technology called Smart Answers. And then the Fusion Knowledge Search Platform, which is basically Core Fusion, but it's about delivering that experience in every single point of interaction. We want to embed that in. It could be a website, it could be a tool set that's being used by internal employees that are doing account management or customer relationship management, or it could be directly in the call center to provide a better knowledge search. And we also have plugins as well, things like Salesforce and so on, that allow you to plug this type of approach into a call center environment depending on what tools you're using. So this is what we mean by this sort of technology. And of course, from a chatbot point of view, without getting into too much of the weeds here, the reason why most chatbots are particularly not very useful today is because they're based on a static model, a Q&A. And what we're trying to anticipate here is a dynamic model. So not just having a document with saying, well, for the last 3 years, this person or people would have asked this question, therefore give them this response. That's not intelligent because we're in a different environment right now. The question or the response that we might have had to the question, which is, am I able to adapt my mortgage payments historically because of the way banks process that? The response might have been, yes, you are, but there's an interest implication, and also it will take 2 to 3 months to adjust that. That might have been a reasonable response. Today, the response might be, given the COVID scenario, here is the subject matter expert you need to speak to because we're able to address this for you right now to keep you in a better financial position. That might be an intelligent response, and I'm inferring a lot here just from the types of things we're dealing with today. But you don't get to do that unless you have a framework for intelligent virtual assistants that's linked to knowledge that you can start to curate and understand through language. And that's exactly what Fusion does today, and it's a really clever piece of technology. The really cool thing about this as well is that we can start this within days. So long as we can identify pretty much from websites or knowledge portals, core information assets, we can get going within just a few days of layering on a capability on top of what you already have without digitally having to change any core systems. This is the nice thing about virtual assistants. They can direct people intelligently. And a good example where we've done that is something like Red Hat, for example. Everybody knows Red Hat, but one of the biggest customers at Lucidworks. And it's just giving you some highlights here of typical types of things that they've been experienced through the use of Fusion, but more importantly, a lot of call deflection as a result of using the technology. Now, I just want to really just point a couple of things, so a little demo. So a lot of people ask me, that sounds great, Simon, but what does it mean in reality? So I'm just going to flick over to a different microphone array here so you can see this. What it actually means to use Fusion Virtual Assistants in a real-life scenario. So let's go ahead and show this.
So future prospective customer might ask, which feature releases do you support?
Feature releases, formerly service packs, are available in a 90-day cycle. We fully support customers on the 5 most recent feature releases.
Now, that particular type of question wasn't pre-recorded. that's something that's dynamically being curated as a result of the question.
Or perhaps instead of a future customer, maybe I'm an investor. I may ask a question along the lines of, does DataBack pay dividends?
No, DataBack currently does not issue cash dividends.
Now, those two questions I asked were pretty simple. Let's make them a little bit more complex and remove some of the keywords out of them. Is there an annual return if I invest in DataBack?
No, DataBack currently does not issue cash dividends.
So here's a great example really showcasing the power of smart answers. I didn't use any of the keywords. I replaced them really with annual, return, invest, and smart answers understood the context and that there is a semantic closeness between my question and the answer that we have indexed. So to have a Q&A system that feels natural and has a high rate of accuracy, you really do need a lot of intelligence all working together behind the scenes. And with smart answers, we take a layered approach to achieving this. For example, we can incorporate things like entity recognition, part-of-speech tagging to identify nouns and verbs within a query. And when we take all that additional information into account, we can create these really simple yet highly effective enhancements that make a conversation feel much more natural. To illustrate this, I'm going to move over to another web application. And I'll start typing some questions in the search box. What's a data cell group? And what's different here is instead of receiving a frequently asked question, I can return a glossary definition that's coming from an entirely different data source. But because we can understand the type of question that was asked, we can boost the most appropriate answer, even if it lives in a different data source. So let's change that into something different. Who can read the data in a data cell location? And Smart Answers identified that this wasn't related to a glossary definition necessarily. It was more closely semantically similar to a frequently asked question. So let's tie all these concepts together. I'll show you what a really fluid conversational experience might look like for a particular line of question. For this, we'll go back to our chat box. What's a client computer group?
A logical grouping of client computers in which selected options can apply to all member clients.
Why would I ever need to use a client computer group?
Once created, client computer groups can be used to perform the following tasks for all their members. Create scheduled tasks, set user security, view job history, generate reports.
And who can tell me more about that?
Aaliyah Abed will likely know. She specializes in networking, client computer groups, and virtual machines.
So what's interesting is that I asked 3 different questions. The first one was related to a glossary term, the second one an FAQ, but let's look at this third one. And I'm going to put it in the search box in this case. So in addition to those first 2 data sources, we can also index data from Active Directory and then apply that line of questioning to a different data source, in this case, one we have called people, and then boost this one up as the first most relevant answer.
So what you've basically heard then, and this is a very sort of fictional sort of, well, not fictional, it's actually based on some real life scenarios, but more of a tech-based triage of information, both in and outside the call center. And what you're seeing here is a multitude of different sources coming together and being semantically referenced to a particular set of questioning. Some statically, based on content that we already have, some dynamically, based on the mapping that we can create through more of a graph architecture behind the scenes here. And this is the true intelligent power of the Fusion Smart Answer system, just an example. So hopefully you found that useful. Let me just go a little bit further on here. Now let's pivot a little bit and talk about active agent efficiency. And this is going to immediately segue pretty much into the Soho conversation. So what we mean by this as we build this out is really a different type of approach, moving from a passive to an active-based model thinking more about the agent, what they need to understand the individual they're talking to, whether that's on a session, a chat stream, or it's actually on a physical virtual call. Also bringing in the right resources dynamically to help with that conversation, not after the fact. Let me get back to you afterwards, I'll send you an email, in the call itself. Using contextual speech mining to understand sentiment, how they think the call's going, and how people feel by the language they're using. And then also elicit minimize risk from the overall conversation itself. I mean, for example, in the financial world, it's possible that people might divulge information that you don't want them to do on a call. So understanding how to deflect some of that so you don't have as much compliance or future risk issues around content being recorded, that might be something you want to get into as well. But most of all, the most important thing is to use artificial intelligence signals models to really embed knowledge management into that human conversational loop, so that you can actually then promote content to the individuals as you're talking to them. And that's what we really truly mean by active intelligence today. Now with that, I'm going to just segue over to George and Lauren a little bit from Soho. So, and we can start talking a little bit more about what it means to drive this type of approach in the call center.
Great, thanks very much, Simon. Appreciate the time and great slides. So I just want to talk a little bit about Speechsquared and what we've done here. So our company, Sohosquared, actually we were formed a couple of years ago, and our focus had been around designing and building solutions focused on information risk and insight. And about a year ago, we realized that there was an opportunity really around audio and speech channels. And Laura and I have worked quite a bit in the past in various compliance and legal use cases where in certain instances audio was used, but the technologies that are out there today were technologies that were out there a decade ago. And they're inflexible, they're costly, and we thought that based on a lot of the work that we were doing with Lucidworks as an example and other technologies, we had a unique opportunity to build from the ground up an audio solution focused on looking at audio and speech channels in a lot of different ways. And we wanted to apply the latest advances in machine learning and AI really from the beginning to the end of this process. And as you'll see, from the point in time that we'd start to process an audio file or an audio feed all the way through how we search and analyze it, we're applying different levels of machine learning and AI throughout. And that allows us to look at this information in ways that have not previously been done. And more importantly, it allows us to do so in a very quick, efficient, and easy way that integrates into common platforms like into a contact center, compliance, and e-discovery solutions. And finally, we're focused again on really trying to derive insight and risk from a common set of channels or a common set of information. And so again, it's looking at how do you manage risk and insight simultaneously? Well, you have to do really a little bit of both anyways, because in order to have the ability to manage risk and understand if there's risk associated with content, you have to understand what's in that content or what's in that conversation. And that also allows you then to derive insight from it. And we, again, wanted to focus doing this at a much lower cost, at a much lower infrastructure requirements than prior solutions that were out there, and provide a much faster means to review the customer interactions or the client interactions that you had, again, across risk and information insight KRIs, and then be able to do this not just in batch, but actually to do this in a real-time setting as well. And most of the use cases you'll see obviously are retrospective analysis of calls for any number of reasons, whether they be risk or insight. But what we're able to do now, because compute power is available, is actually do this in real time and actually take that insight and take the machine learning and AI that we're applying at the time we process the information and actually now assist advisors or agents working in real time with audio channels. Next slide. One thing we wanted to talk a little bit about was we have access to or the ability to work with over 32 languages, but one of the keys is the ability to apply a common model for English in particular. So English is one of the largest or I think the predominant language that's used from an international and from obviously a domestic commerce perspective. We can obviously use many other languages and do as well in our platform. But what happens in a lot of other platforms is that you have multiple models for English. So you may have a model that's focused on UK English, maybe in the Gulf region, something else for Australia, something of course different here in the US, or even multiple models in the US. But what we're able to do is actually leverage a model or a series of models that were developed over thousands of spoken hours of words and millions of terms in deep neural networks that'll actually now have a common model for what we call global English, or what's called global English. And we leverage that model from a company called Speechmatics, who we leverage their technology at the very core of our language models. Next slide. And so we really have three different parts of Speechsquared. The first part is what we call Speechsquared ASR, and this is the automated speech recognition. This is where we take an audio feed of some form, whether it's a file or if it's real-time channels. And at the point in time we actually start processing that information for the transcription, we actually start to apply a tremendous amount of looking at this information in many other ways and starting to apply other forms of machine learning. So we're doing entity extraction, sentiment analysis, and parts of speech and topic analysis at the time we actually process the file. So we don't wait until a later point in time and apply it. And we do it for a couple of reasons. One, this is what allows us to start to do things in real time. And the second piece is it allows us to feed third-party systems downstream, whether it's our own analytics or somebody else's analytics platform. We can take all of that information and package it up with the transcript, the file, and obviously all the derived insights that we've determined. We do automated redaction as well, as you'll see, and then we have the ability to really templatize a lot of the batch or real-time or batch processing as well to make that very easy for clients to work with. And again, the most important thing for us is it's an open platform with APIs upstream and downstream that allow us to either receive or feed information to third-party systems. And then we take this information, and this is where the power of Fusion and Lucidworks comes in particular, which is now we take all of that information, and in our analytics, we're using Fusion at the core. And so this information feeds obviously an advanced full text search engine, a full text index, but goes way beyond that as well. We're able now to apply things like policy and scenario analysis based on really the power of Fusion. And you'll see as we derive all kinds of information, we can then drive workflow in what we call scenarios or intent-based reviews. And then you'll see all types of visual dashboards that are built as well that are focused on series and trending over time. Next slide. And this is what you're going to see in a second, which is what we call Realtime Assist, Speechsquared Realtime Assist. This is at a moment in time when an advisor or an agent is servicing a client or a customer, and the transcript is actually being generated in real time from that audio channel. But again, as you saw on the prior slide, we're actually deriving things like sentiment, as you'll see along the top of the screen, being automatically generated in real time as you move through the course of a call. And then you're going to start to see automatically that topics and intent are generated, and then we go back then and are querying Fusion for content from knowledge bases that would help that agent. So for example, if somebody's calling about a mortgage issue or closing an account, we'll automatically go back and we know the intent and we know the topic. And then we can go back and say, let's pull back information that's relevant here around procedures for somebody who has issues with their mortgages, or the procedure to close an account, or how do we take and potentially save someone who's trying to close out an account, and what are the procedures. And finally, along the right, or what we call key risk and key performance indicators, which is instead of having an agent having to click through a series of buttons and saying, I asked the person what their name was, I've authenticated them, I've asked about the issue that's at hand, this is automatically being derived and updated because we're, again, doing all of this in real time at the time we process the data. And so you'll see all of this happen very quickly. And once you'll see this demo, then I'll make a couple comments at the end. So Simon, I'll let you go ahead and fire up that demo.
Okay, let me just go and change my microphone array a little bit. So I'm going to show you a real life example here with Lauren talking through the product. Thanks, Lauren.
In this demonstration, we will be listening in on a call center conversation regarding a delinquent mortgage.
Welcome to our company. My name is Susan. Who am I speaking with, please?
My name is James.
Hi, James. Can I have your social security number to verify your account?
Yes, it's 660019386.
Thank you. How may I help you?
I have a mortgage account and I lost my job because of COVID-19, and I'm just looking for some options.
I'm sorry to hear that. I hope your family is safe.
Yeah, yes, they are.
I see you are 92 days behind. Don't worry. To ease the financial strain, our alerts are actually backed by federal agencies, and based on my records, we can offer you help.
SpeechMax integrates with CRMs and other third-party applications to allow agents to provide their notes and even key analytical data that was gathered during the conversation.
Great. So what you're actually seeing, and first of all, what you've seen will also go up on our YouTube channel in case you had a little bit of difficulty hearing any of that. But what you actually saw along the left-hand side of the screen was then the transcript being generated in real time and diarized so that we actually know who the client, what's being spoken of by the client and what the agent is speaking. In the center, what you actually saw were the topics being generated, and then the key actions and the key information that's available for the agent as it pertained to this particular instance, which was somebody had issues around their mortgage payments because of being laid off in COVID. Also, you saw automated redaction, and along the right, you actually started to see, or did see, the KRIs were getting automatically updated as this conversation went on. And that's the key of actually being able to process and apply all of these analytics and the machine learning at the point in time we're processing the data, as opposed to doing it downstream. So with that, and we'll obviously post this to our YouTube channel, I will turn this back over to Simon.
Great. Thank you so much, George. So you've seen a couple of good demos there, and all snippets of particular approaches that we've taken. Obviously, this is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that's underneath all of these demonstrations that we can get into and show you more value. But just sort of bringing this together to try and summarize where we've come from in this whole webinar today to where we are today, is we talked about all of that pain and all of those issues around call volume, chat sessions, 4 to 1,000% increase in the amount of volume of activity that's going on with call centers and customer success type initiatives, all under the banner of organizations rapidly trying to digitally transform what they do today. And we highlighted all the technology and the requirements space that people are trying to address today. And the key that we're trying to highlight to you is we have a single unified approach to doing this today. Now, the core of the way the data is being managed and being presented insightfully is using Fusion. And that's a Lucidworks indexing, verted index technology proven globally in over 400 of the global 2,000 organizations at massive scale. But then we've nuanced this with particular types of approach, and I realized that I've missed the analytics piece off of Speech 2 here. But we talk about site search, the ability to embed in a website to improve that experience. We talk about data discovery search for the idea of our knowledge bases, and where you saw that in the demo when somebody's asking a very specific question from a knowledge base. And then using something like Smart Answers to go and intelligently adapt your chatbots and virtual assistants so that they can be much more responsive, learn from themselves. And one of the things you didn't see in that demo, for example, was that we are able to continually learn. So if a chatbot, for example, promotes the right answer, we often reply back and say, was that accurate? And then if somebody says yes, then we'll remember that, so the next time around we know to surface that question or that answer more dynamically. And then on the Soho side, you've seen really 3 pieces of technology built off the Speech 2 platform, which is also underpinned by Fusion and some other technology. But looking at Realtime Assist to create the right type of a direction and recommendation in the call itself, and also and very interestingly to go through the typical compliance approach to how you validate an individual, but not do it as a call sheet, but just do it dynamically in conversation so you can see how that's performing with your key metrics. We're detecting sentiment, so we can start to understand how the call's going and things that we need to do to deflect that back into a positive scenario. And then we've got the ability to really get to grips and understand how the call center and our customer success metrics are performing by looking at the overall types of analytics in ways that we've really not been able to do at this point. So this fundamentally is the wheelhouse, and what this means in terms of summary then is the benefits here. And at this point, I'll probably ask Lauren and George to come and jump on if anybody has any questions. But really what we're trying to say is this is driving both an active and passive value approach for the customer success in the call center, both in and outside of how people think of the call center function. So that's about improving information dissemination first and foremost. #1 objective of Gartner in their research analysis when it came out at the end of June. Also, we're alleviating the traditional view of chatbots to provide intelligence in the way that we're responding with virtual assistants. We're moving to a real-time, not a post-time type scenario when we're actively on the phone with people in the call center or a live session to make sure that they have the right recommendations, are connected to the right people and the right resources. And fundamentally, whether you think of this as related to call centers specifically or just broadly, all of this information is available to everybody in the enterprise. So what we're effectively doing is building a know your customer type solution, augmenting typical customer relationship management with all sorts of other information sources and signals and knowledge and AI to really truly create an advanced capability for employees to plug into the way that their customers really need to be supported. And finally, all of this done through visual technology, nothing really sort of embedded or archaic, modern approaches to the way that we're doing things, integration to things like Alexa and Siri and Google Assistant as examples there, but also using real-time speech recognition in the whole agent-based model in the call center as well, with the goal of reducing risk, driving customer success, and overall improving our scenario planning so we can get better stat rates, make our call centers more efficient, deflect call volume that we can do easily through information dissemination, and do that at scale, at high volume. So that was it really from us. I will move quickly to the question answering slide, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or and just drop us an email afterwards. We have a couple of good ways in which you'll be getting some follow-up as to how to ask questions or approach us after this webinar today, but hopefully you found that useful. Now I'm not sure, George, Lauren, Morgan on the line here, and Thorne, if we have any other types of questions in the chat, but let's see. Okay.
So one of the questions in here was, does this solution have support for using a knowledge database instead of a simple Q&A database? And the answer to that question is absolutely, and that's really the whole point. If everything was something simple, right, a simple question, a simple answer, you don't really necessarily need to go any further, any deeper. But that's really not the problems that we're trying to solve, and really not the problems that really lead you to a much different solution. In the audio channels, we talk a little bit about command-driven speech, right? Which is, Siri, turn on the lights. What is the interest rate today on a mortgage for a 30-year? Something that's very straightforward. It's a question and an answer. What we were trying to do, and as you'll see, and what we have been doing, is long-form speech, right? A dialogue, a conversation, something that goes on for many minutes. Something that has all kinds of different things that you have to think about, everything from the topics of the speech, the sentiment of the speech, who's actually speaking, and looking at all of those different factors is actually how you understand what's happening within a conversation. You actually don't look at just one thing. So the biggest difference really is that when we understand those things in real time, the information we need is much, much broader as well. So then we go out and we're actually looking at, as an example, right, policies and procedure manuals, or we're looking at marketing content, and large sets of content then become the source for information we feed back to an advisor or to an agent.
Really good answer there, George. There's another question popped up as well, which someone's asked, how this solution set compares to some other sort of competitive environments. One was quoted with Pega AI. I don't know whether you can answer that specifically. I can definitely talk to the type of intelligence we're promoting through AI on the front side of this, George.
Well, I'm not going to speak to any one particular potential person out there or company out there. Rather, I guess our approach to this. So we're looking at things in a lot of different contexts or in a number of different dimensions. And as you saw, first of all, we're applying AI and machine learning actually as we're processing the audio file, right? That's where we start doing topics and parts of speech analysis. We start doing sentiment analysis and levels of entity extraction. The models that are upstream from that, which are the language models, are actually all AI built on large neural networks, very, very deep, big neural networks, right? So that's another set of AI that's being applied. As we start moving downstream, we're applying other levels of analysis or AI and machine learning jobs that are within Fusion, and obviously and then those that we built ourselves. And so I would just say that we're trying to leverage it at the right point, the different models at the right point at the right time, and that combination gives us something we think is unique.
Great, thanks, George. Actually, another related question that someone's popped up is, and I can pick this one: does this smart answering allow us to get content chunking, connecting knowledge graph while responding back to a chat interpretation? And the short answer to that is absolutely. That's the sort of intelligence we have around smart answers. So let me just break that down for you. So smart answers, what it does is it has a 2 million object learning model built behind it that we use to create effectively a form of semantic reference. And that's what we use to create some association with content. Now, obviously, if you have Q&A content yourself or forums content or other types of curated content that's coming from a call center environment, we can push that through the model and then we can build something specific to you. That's what we call a warm start model. We also have two other options. One is a sort of cold start model where we take effectively frameworks that are non-content related, where we have built them specifically from, these are models from other customers or other publicly available sources, which are not about the data set, your data set yourself. It's more about the way that the data is referenced in the particular industry you're in. And then we can go and connect that to a knowledge source, which is usually underpinned by a Fusion graph, which is a knowledge graph underlyingly, which allows us to connect that data set real time within the chat scenario. And that's the intelligence that's powering it. And then the third scenario is where we don't have any contextual information at all, and we just pull a referenceable data set down and we start using that as well. So for instance, in the context of public health, for example, we might go to CDC or might go to WHO, we might grab their data set and use that as a reference point and then push that into a modeling environment. The bottom line is, though, that the question that related to how we connect that framework around intelligence and conversation to something that's maybe more knowledge centered. And what Fusion's doing in the back end is dynamically looking at the type of questioning that's going on from natural language, extracting that, mapping it through the semantic model, understanding synonym and association effectively, but it's much more intelligent and sophisticated than that. And then allowing us to offer up corpuses of data that may have been collected real time from a knowledge-based model to then link that to a particular user question. And in doing that, yes, we start to do things like chunking and clustering. We allow people to, we're effectively faceting and creating and understanding the classification of the content. That's also about personalization. If we know an individual is approaching this from a particular part of an organization or a particular narrative that we can have identified a classification of content around, we can then focus in on that specifically, and that contextually is aligning the responses more to that individual and the personalization needs that they have. Very sophisticated on the back end and very intelligent, very sort of next generation really in terms of how you ever think about this type of thing. That was a long answer, sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm looking. I think we're good there, Simon. Maybe this is a good point for us to thank everybody and sign off.
Great, I appreciate it. Thanks very much, everyone. Enjoyed you joining today, and we'll be promoting this recording of the webinar back from Soho's website. And yeah, have a great day. Stay safe.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.